Welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Listen in as we discuss all things business, growth and marketing with business owners, thought leaders and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, founder of Roundhouse, the creative agency, Saul Edmonds.
Oh, hi everyone, and welcome to the Grow Your Business podcast. Today I'm speaking with Chris Yeend from Squash Australia around the topic, the growth of squash in Australia. Chris, how you going?
Very well, mate. Thanks for having me on board. It's pretty exciting and a good opportunity to talk about a very big sport here in Australia.
Yeah, totally. It's something that a lot of people love, and it should be way more popular.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. It's amazing how many people you sort of speak to over the years that used to play a fair bit of it, and then for whatever reason they stopped playing. But there is quite of a almost every sort of second or third person that I sort of speak to now that I say, I work for Squash Australia. And they're like, I used to play squash back in the day. And I might have known them for 20 years, and but it was something they played as a kid. So it's very interesting that while the numbers aren't the highest of what they used to be in the past, but so many people have played and used to play quite frequently. So it's great. I had this realization with my sister too, and she knows that I play squash, and then she reminded me, and I just had in my mind that she had never played squash for some reason. She was like, no, I used to play. I remember when I was like, oh, that's right, you did. Like when I was like a little kid, because she's like 10 years sort of older than me. It's like, that's right, you did too for a while. Like even her. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That so before we dive into the main topic, I'll just get like for people who don't know you, which will probably be many people listening to this podcast. Of course.
Can you just give everyone just a bit of a short intro about who you are, Squash Australia, and anything else you'd like to add, Chris?
Yeah. So I've been with Squash Australia in the PR and communications coordinator role for 12 months, and my lovely wife and I, we moved up from sunny Victoria to Brisbane in early 2019 for a bit of a change of pace, change of scenery. But I grew up in Victorian country football, and I was a sports journalist over there before I progressed to be the media manager of I think about 4 major netball leagues in Victoria under the AFL Goldfields hub. And so when I come up to Squash Australia, I've enjoyed having that experience of being involved in a big footy environment and being able to take some of those skills, because football is God in Victoria in a sense, the Aussie rules. So to be able to bring that into this role, and which has worked out beautifully. And I guess Squash Australia, we're responsible for working with all states and centres right around the country to assist them, to help them grow the game, while also putting a big impact on growing development with a big focus on high performance as well, working in partnership with the AIS, Com Games Australia, and working closely with Sport Australia too, to build the next lot of talent to represent Australia at future games. So there's a fair bit of focus in that, and a lot of what we sort of do is the success of the high performance team. It ensures that we're able to get access to more government funding that we can therefore use on participation programs to further grow our other programs at other levels. So that's where we're sort of at, and we're assist with all sort of online working with to getting competitions up and running and assisting with that. So our focus is to help the states and help the centres thrive, and also to make the sport represent the sport in a big way on the international scale.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like I always find the interesting part about sport in general, and like I'm specifically talking about squash is like so much of people's experience these days of sport outside of like actually playing it. Then if people are going to get interested in it, or sort of revisiting it, or they're like seeing it for the first time, is then how much they're influenced or kind of want to be a part of something again, can sometimes then also come from the online space too, from watching things like people's because people do that obviously a lot. Like how is I guess like in your experience for what you've done before coming to Squash Australia, how has that kind of experience informed thinking about that aspect of it, like say the online media part of it?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first joined AFL Goldfields, we had a few avenues that we were sort of working through online. So we had maybe for our various leagues, we may have had one TV show per week. My desire was to grow like it was an online TV show per week. My experience was to I turned what was a football netball show to 2 football shows and a netball show in the middle of the week. So what we did is when I went to the recording studio, so to speak, I would record a review of the weekend's matches and a preview of the next weekend's matches, and then do a netball show that spoke more about what happened from the weekend and what's happening this weekend. So we went from having probably 1 show per week per league, and sometimes that was stretching it, to growing it to 3. So we had 3 major leagues, and then we were working on the women's side of things. So we had a women's competition that has since started to thrive. So we added another TV show in there. So adding another one under our umbrella, we were recording 10. So then we went back to our football netball records, and we're like, well, I wanted to set a format to ensure that what coverage I wanted to have equal coverage for netball as football was getting, because football was massive, and I wanted to highlight the growth of female participation in sport anyway. So we addressed that to try and get the netball coverage up to standard in the weekly records that people buy at the ground or read online. So I've taken that and I've gone, we've looked at all the major areas within our football netball area, and everyone's getting maximum coverage. So me sort of coming into this role here, I'm looking at what we've got the states, I'm looking at what we've got all the centres around the country, and my focus is we have to focus on the grassroots. We have to focus on the bottom, which is exactly what we did with Goldfields. I was privileged to be the innovator of that, to make sure that all leagues were getting the same coverage and all people were getting the same coverage. So when I sort of came here to Squash Australia, once I sort of settled myself in, my aim was, okay, we have to do a lot more work in promoting what's happening around the centres around Australia, share what's sort of going on. We've already got an existing audience, and the centres have got an existing audience. So let's try and take our audience to them and share some of that. So some centres can look at other centres through our social media channels and look at what other centres are doing and get other ideas and collaborate and things like that. So it's all part of this big networking process. So we've already got a lot of great work that's happening at high performance level, but I'll really want to consolidate on what's happening at the foundation, because that's where everyday punters come in, and everyone loves seeing themselves online.
Yeah. It's those stories, right? You know, it's like those. You know, it's the. I can't remember what the term is, but you know, it's generally about the idea that stories sell. You know, not necessarily even in the strict marketing sense, but you're selling an idea, you know, and things are best conveyed, I think anyway, like through stories. I mean, we've been doing it as humans forever. You know, we tell the story, and you know, to weave an idea into, you know, either you seeing yourself in that person, but you're exactly right. I mean, like it's like a grassroots level is always super important for anything, because it's the foundation for, you know, for all future growth. And I mean, and I guess as a segue, just kind of leading into a question that I had about your perspective on what squash was like in, say, the 70s and 80s, I suppose, like when Australia was really, you know, one of the leading sort of nations in the world as far as squash, really, weren't we? And
yeah, absolutely. Through the 70s and 80s, and the World Junior Champs have served a really good platform for that as well. Seeing the great amount of talent that's come through the 70s and 80s, and even into the early parts of the 90s, seeing those young players sort of come through, and seeing the talent at the top stage was reflective of the audience and the participation we had around the country in general. And then you look at someone like Heather Mackay, who's probably one of the most recognisable, should be one of the most recognisable sporting figures in the history of Australian sport, with all that she's achieved. And sport, you could argue, I think too. Yeah, I think so, definitely.
They're just all sport. She's incredible.
Yeah, she's effectively the Don Bradman. And it's a shame that I don't think she sort of gets the recognition on the major scale that she deserves, because she is probably one of the most recognisable sports people in the history of Australian sport. And when we're in a sort of position, a transition period at the moment, where there is a lot of focus in Australia on what we can do to grow women's sport. I mean, we're seeing that through cricket, we're seeing that through AFL. We're very, very open-minded and really driven to improve female development at squash level too. It's happening everywhere. It's a shame we didn't have someone like a Heather Mackay who was at the top of her game in the sports Australians perspective to just encourage more people to go for that and encourage more women just to play sport full stop and excel at the best they can.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like there's, and it's not, in sort of saying that too, it's not really taking anything away from the fact that sort of since then too, we've had like, fantastic, like very high level, incredible squash players. It's just like the level, the probably the amount of people and the amount of people doing it, I guess, to some extent outside of, other specific programs at the Institute of Sport and at other kind of levels, like even outside of that, I always feel that, that grassroots amount of clubs, amount of people playing, has some real effect. And I sort of, I guess I say that too. I was watching a documentary a while back about something that had sort of piqued my curiosity about why there were so many Egyptian players in the top. I think Egypt currently still has, I think it's literally half of the men and women in the top 10 or 20 Egyptian. I was like, what's up with that? Like, how's it? And there was if you search for, you may have already seen it, but for anyone else listening, if you search for something around those sort of terms, you'll find it. There was this guy from England, I think, who did a documentary about it. It was really interesting about how, I can't remember, it was like in late 90s, I think, there was this big surge, one of the players who became a bit of a national figure and sort of national hero. And the Egyptian government, who I think the president at the time was also a bit squash crazy himself, and they just pumped this huge amount of money and funds into this. They had this like figurehead, and they pumped this, and they made all these clubs, there's like hundreds of clubs, so just all through Egypt, and then since then, like it's had this incredible grassroots sort of drive, and I thought, and I'm not saying that's obviously not necessarily realistic for everyone. That's what they did, but it just highlighted that fact to me that that it's kind of all about just having people coming through that flows through to like the families of those kids who are probably also playing, and it becomes a real cultural and like almost like a national sport over there. And it kind of used to be in some way here, I think, I feel.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And while I guess Australia's decline in the rankings in terms of the production of players there is that decline there, but it's also highlighting, as you said, with Egypt and other countries as well, is that their numbers are growing. So there is a healthy player base around the world. We're still seeing more players around the world through their respective countries playing. So we're not sort of experiencing a massive decline around the world. We're probably in some areas we're seeing them actually go up.
Yeah, that's right. And there's that, and sort of something that I, as a person who's not necessarily in the know as to why these things happen, but you see that in the United States too. There's the US hasn't got like a huge amount of people in the top 50 or sort of 100 either, but they've got a huge amount of support then for squash and lots of major competitions, and so they have a lot of support behind it too. So I mean, on varying levels, there's it's an interesting mix, because there's obviously elements of just having more facilities to play squash, and having the people, with the willingness like to put up the money to do that, and not to turn them into gyms, and just to keep that alive. There kind of has to be, money plus like a real passion for it too, because like you're not just going to necessarily, some people, a choice to turn it into something that's going to make more profit or something else. I always feel like it's very much chicken and the egg, because like you can't then move forward in a specific way unless you have, a certain level of like infrastructure there. But then you can, at the same time, if you've got the right amount of like passion to do it, and people who, put themselves out there to keep it moving forward. But I suppose that's like with anything really, isn't it?
It's a supply and demand thing, I think. And if the demand is quite high in the States for people to want to play, not necessarily work their way up the national ranks and just play a few times a week or whatever it is, and they're filling up the respective courts over there, then I think that's fantastic. And it's keeping anyone that wants to open a squash centre over there, if they're noticing there's already a good pool of people wanting to still play, then it's encouraging for more people to go, well, we'll build a squash centre and we'll start our own business and run that, because a lot of them are independently owned too around the country, not necessarily just with the States. And that's probably what we're experiencing at the moment, just during the COVID-19 period, is we're really experiencing the fact that centres are closing down, or closing down during this period, and they're privately owned business. People work, that's their bread and butter. So whereas a lot of other major sports that we see around the country, they're community based. A lot of you up here, you've got your rugby and you've got your soccer. They're community-driven projects. They're not that you don't have too many people that are employed to run the whole thing to keep it going. So whereas a lot of the squash centres are privately owned, and that's where people make their bread and butter out of.
Yeah, no. So as a person who's now like the key sort of driving person in this particular role, like doing a pretty good job, Chris.
Thanks, mate.
I think you are. I think you're doing like a really fantastic job, actually. And it's great to, like, as a person who's now kind of in this role, you've been in it for a while. What would you like to see? I know this is kind of from you, but also as like representative of Squash Australia, like what would you like to see for squash in Australia over the next, like, say, a bit more long term, like 4 to 5 years? Like, what's the general sort of drive?
Probably selfishly, and I think this is where our great mates over at Rockhampton are doing an exceptional job. The first thing that sort of comes to mind is I want to see more squash being visually accessible. So I'd love to see squash centres around the country if they're running a Tuesday night event or a Thursday night event. I mean, again, Rockhampton, I get lots of notifications about what they're doing. If they've got streaming services there, run them. Put it online so people can sit down on a Thursday night or whatever, and they might be at their computer, or they might be able to bring it up on YouTube and just sit back and watch some squash. Yeah. So I'd love to be able to, like, we've got over 450 centres around the country. If we were able to get 100 of those to go, look, we'd love to learn more about streaming. Let's do more of that, and we can stream our own matches and have that. So putting that exposure out there, because we're not getting it on mainstream TV at the moment. I think it's something that's it will happen over time, because we're doing some work in that space. But if you've got the capacity to do it, but then I look at it I dial it back from a simple level, from a digital media perspective, and I just have this grand vision, and I know it's not possible, but I would like to see over the next 4 to 5 years, if we're able to see maybe 60 to 80% of the centres be very, very active in some capacity on Facebook or their websites or Instagram, Twitter, and then that can translate into YouTube and stuff.
Yeah, but then, it might be possible though, because once again, it comes back to like a range of different factors. Like there's a lot of those are just simple human factors. I mean, the fact that, everybody has the facility, to, of course, do that. That's easy. The hard part, and this is from, us kind of working in this area too, and seeing what roadblocks are put in place for stuff by like unintentionally or sort of intentionally, because people are often just uncomfortable with that, or they just simply don't know how. Then you just have a good plan, you have people helping, and next thing, I know I'm oversimplifying it here, but I think to some extent, I think this is my sort of observations about this sort of stuff, is that when things, like if you look at it from the point of view of when things are successful, like say either in other sports or other, whatever those activities are, even if it's not sports related, the times that things become successful is usually when there's like a person or people who have that specific task and role. It's their job to do it. They, it's not part of other stuff, because if it is, it's going to be pushed usually to like the back of the queue.
Yeah.
Because people are either they're running their own business. I mean, everybody gets that. That's very sensible. If you've got stuff that you really don't feel is going to like feed your family and like pay your employees, you're probably not going to do it. That's just the reality of it. And if you got, and then you're doing your accounts and everything, after the kids have gone to bed, you're probably not going to be going on Facebook and posting stuff. Correct. But if person or people to do that, and then a support infrastructure, which is, that's what I really like about what you guys are doing too, because at least like it's in steps, like it's an introduction of something that eventually will become habit, because it kind of has to become habit, doesn't it? I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And this is probably, we sort of touched on this earlier about coming from local football and working community football. And I know it's not an easy thing to do, but this is where I personally am working with the states a little bit to provide. Ultimately, we want to provide a guideline so we can assist centres, or the states can assist the centres to be able to introduce some basic social media training. Because the benefit that I see of social media, I see it in working in two possible ways. Because when we're to be honest, probably worldwide, squash itself, it's a self-promoter. It's the mainstream media doesn't go to the well so much. A lot of the promotion you see worldwide is from what's happening within. So if I see the growth in social media, if I'm a interested community sponsor, or I'm a local business that wants to support a local sports organisation, I'm looking at social media. So I'd be looking at a squash social media page, what sort of traffic they're doing, what sort of hits they're getting. And so if I'm going to advertise with them and organise a little bit of a marketing thing for them, so we do the player of the week or whatever, and that gets 500 hits, and I'll be like, well, okay, I'm happy to put my money into that. So then the more social media traffic you get, you're opening up more doors to get more money in. And putting on my media hat, bad visual there. But when I used to work at a newspaper back in the day, if you had a little bit of spare space, you would look at areas that look at other sports that are doing a bit well on social media. So they've got regular content for them. So then we've noticed that recently we've had a number of we've done a number of stories with the ADC. The more stuff that we as a sport are producing online, it draws attention of some of the other mainstream media people who are looking to do that. So if you're building it from within, you're attracting more money and you're attracting more mainstream media exposure. And then if you continue on that momentum, you'll likely stay in that eye of that, because you want something, when you're working in mainstream media, you want something that captures your attention and continues to capture your attention. And so if you're seeing more stories are getting put out there, that's where you want to go to the well more often.
And it's a good story then too, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
That comes back to, because I mean, I'm not a media person, but my impression has always been that there would always be, to some extent, like a shortage of stories, and you're always on the hunt for good stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, sometimes they have to be made up then too, don't they? But
yeah,
that's another story. But that idea though is, I mean, it's kind of rife for the picking too, because knowing that fact, whether it's through traditional media and their online channels, or what we're talking about with people doing community-based stuff and sharing with friends and family,
Mm-hmm.
and then some of those people being in business, and some of those people also being squash players, and so on and so on and so on. Like it can sort of well, let's not use the word viral because that's kind of a bit viral. That term's a bit too viral. Is that? But that idea though is a real thing. Like the term's bandied around a lot. Things going viral, but viral on whatever level. You know, meaning that an idea, if it's like what's that term? It's like a sticky idea, like something that sticks in people's minds for whatever reason. It really captures people's attention, either, you know, through emotion or somebody doing well or sort of whatever.
It comes back to the people stories too.
Yeah.
And people identify with, And to be honest, like I mentioned Rockhampton before up in northern Queensland, but I know they do regular streaming. I'll get notifications. So on a personal level, I'll either share it or I'll sit back and it doesn't matter who's playing, but I will just habitually sit back for 5 or 10 minutes and just watch the games. That's sort of happening. Yeah. But because they're doing it more often, then you're becoming used to it, you're becoming trained to it, and you're looking out for it.
But I was actually thinking about kind of the whole watching online and watching in the real world squash thing when I was playing the other night, and I was like, you're watching, that's always a big part of when you're playing squash because of, I guess, the physical setup of it, and people are walking around, they're playing, like it's a really good, you know, forum to watch a range of different games. And and I was thinking, if you could somehow, you know, apart obviously from like the streaming side of things, if you can capture more of that and share that, and, you know, somehow get that same not the same experience, because it's never going to be the same, but you know, as it starts to like snowball and there's more interest and more people, generally sharing, because that's obviously the power of things like social media specifically, is obviously all about content, and then all about people sharing it and liking it and telling other people, and that, that's, to get your audience kind of working for you in effect.
And particularly during these tough times as well. One of the big things that stood out to me during COVID, and just the work that the Victoria squash and racquetball team have been doing with their weekly game shows, that they were doing that every night, and what they were doing is that they charged $10 per night, but that money went back into the sport. But I think at any one time they might have had maybe 40 centres. The people from 40 centres join every Tuesday night. And during tough times, it was a way to bring the community together. And I think it's fantastic, because it started off small, but it just continued to grow. But it's all about sort of bringing communities together. But it was innovative, and it was innovative in a way that was also putting not just bringing people together, and also they were bringing former stars. They had a special guest every week, so they'd have some of the biggest names in Squash Australia history come in and be special guests and participate in the game show itself. And so, and they would provide a platform for everyone that was there to ask questions, to do a bit of a Q&A afterwards. So it was a way to bring the centres together, but also engage with people. Like I remember sitting in on one where we had Stuart Boswell, who was a special guest there, and people were able to learn from him and ask questions, going, Bos, what sort of recommendations do you have for these sorts of drills? And so they were able to get coaching tips off him. And even some other big names, they were able to pick their brains and get some coaching tips and ask some questions, and then they were able to take that to their respective games. So that's something I was really excited about with Victoria, just sort of thinking outside the box, because it has stimulated the conversation. I mean, it's a pipe dream, but if we're able to lure more states to doing like an international or a national game show, where we could have people representing all over the country, different states, to be able to bring them together and just engage and whatnot. And I mean, I can even draw that onto the experience where we had the coach and referee forum, where the guys that were running it were expecting probably a combined total of 50 people, but they ended up getting a combined total of 200 people, and they were having people from all around the country engaging and they would have someone that was running the seminar or running the conference, and they were able to ask more questions. So we're looking at ways at the moment, as we're talking about the streaming and the way we've got to be self-promoting and stuff that Victoria's doing, but ways to just bring people together from all over the country that physically can't be there and engage at the same time and collaborate with ideas and take that back to their centres or their states and continue to grow the sport from there, as opposed to having people from Western Australia fly to Victoria or Tasmania flying to Northern Territory. Like I think this is the where technology is certainly playing its part.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's a great, like all technology or things that we use as people for business or for pleasure, like these things are great tools. They're good tool to, that's kind of the thing that's sort of the weird irony about social media. I always find, like, even sort of working in this industry, is that it's both, it is both in one respect sort of a disconnect from the real world, but at the same time an amazing tool to still bring people together, and to share stories, and it's sort of and it doesn't have to be one or the other too, because like I always find like the sweet spot for how like any digital media or any, like, especially social media works, is where there's like a tighter connection between what's actually happening in the real world, and it's not a replacement for that. It's sort of enhancing it. It's like showing things, either for people who couldn't be there, or like, I would just use probably my own example of when I used to play squash years ago and hadn't played for a while, and returned a few years ago, and like squash kind of crazy ever since again. And so like in a pretty intense kind of way. But the thing that I found when I first came back, having not watched or thought about or sort of had really any exposure except for an occasional hit, like very rarely, was I went online and I found like Squash TV, and I found like everything that the PSA was putting out there, and I was like, that's not what I remember squash to be like. I was like, man, this is really amazing. And I was kind of sucked straight back into it. Not only because of that, but I was obviously playing squash too, but that the way they were visualizing it and all the innovation that they had for showing squash in various kind of environments in all sorts of places around the world, I was like, that's fantastic. That's like, from a media perspective, I was like, that highlights squash in a fantastic, dynamic, visual, interesting, informative way. The commentators, like the commentary is great. And it kind of, I guess, like on a very simple level, because like, squash, as I guess like many people know, like it's a pretty dynamic sport, and it's not, and I always knew that, like playing squash, but visually it didn't have that vibe. It wasn't always put across in that way. Mm-hmm. But then seeing this in this brand new light, being like thrust into it again, kind of overnight, and then going online and finding all this stuff, was like, that's it. Like that's it's
amazing too, because it ties into what we were talking about before, is that what you're seeing on the PSA circuit, that's the sport driving itself. It's not a major media organisation going and, I'm going to pick that up and go for a run and we'll do it our way. It's a lot of everything of what you're seeing. Most of the content you're seeing online is the sport going, well, we need to grow our market. We need to promote ourselves. So this is what we're doing. The PSA have done an outstanding job, but that's all come from themselves, which is terrific.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you're exactly right. And then you've got Squash Skills online. There's like is a site which is sort of, I'm not sure the exact association with the PSA, but online learning is of course a huge thing these days. And even just from a media perspective, like even as a person who builds websites and apps and designs brands and a range of different things. I was like, it's well done. It's really, it looks amazing. It's modern, it's fresh. It represents, got fantastic content, from, things that are really valuable. Like, it's just a great example outside of my interest in squash. I was like, I went over there. I was like, squash skills, is that going to be of any benefit to me as a squash player? I tried it out. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, by the way, everyone listening, I'm not trying to sell like squash skills here, but I'm just like using it as a example, because, it kind of feeds into this idea of learning and sharing as a great tool to, to share, I guess, like almost share like the passion that people have. Like when you got great content, you got great stories, the work does itself, doesn't it? Like it sort of
correct. And this is probably it's probably been what we're seeing all around the world at the moment. We're seeing just a united front from as hopefully all sports to go, well, we want to increase women participation, full stop. So what we're seeing is a lot more materials looking at the foundations of the sport. So there's a lot more basic things that can encourage people to the basic skills and certain knowledges to start from the bottom up and build their way up. So it's great for people like yourself who are returning to the game, who are able to actually look on some of those resources, particularly in the squash circuit, and go back to basics, because that information's there, which is what you need to learn if there's directive from particular sports to get more women to play. Well, you need to go back to your foundations. You need to go back to the fundamentals. And coming from a female football background back in Victoria, is there was a lot of resources being pumped into just teaching very basic skills to get women to play the game and captivate their interest. If you're a new person, if you're a young guy that's looking to try and play that game, well, you can use those resources again. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity worldwide that we're seeing more range of education that people can access now, because of the focus of having to try and bring more people into the game, which suits 50% of the world demographic.
Yeah, and you've got like the perspective too, like as our perspective, or mine personally, looking at that was also from the perspective of a designer going, I think that's really cool. Just on a really simple level, I was going, if I was doing that, like I look at what other designers and other people do, and I go, that's great, like that's well executed, and that sounds like a really, say, insignificant thing maybe to a lot of other people listening, but like the fact is too, people in general, whether they sort of really think about this or not, which they probably don't, like the fact remains that people in general, whether it's their personal interests or sport related things, people have much higher level of sort of expectations of what they're used to, because the quality of media and content, and also the amount of it people are absorbing, gives people, I think anyway, I mean, I'm sure other people might have a differing point of view on this, but my perspective is that people in general have a much better sense of what is good and what isn't, in terms of like good design. I mean, it's all a bit subjective if you want to talk, about art, whatever, but outside of stylistically, like, flouncy, clean design, whatever, there's still good and bad, and there's still things that are really well executed, and from a design perspective and online, and that's where things like what a PSA has done, and things like squash skills, just from my own perspective, that was still a factor. Like if I and I mean, I know this is the case, I don't have to go back in time and revisit it in like another alternate universe. If like those sites and everything was really badly done, would I have been so interested? I don't think I would have been. Like if I was really honest, it's like, if anyone listening if you ask yourself the question, if you go to somebody's website and like, even sometimes if you know they provide a good service and you go there and your experience is bad for whatever reason, it looks dodgy or it's not working or something, what's your general feeling? It's usually question in your mind, or no, I'll just go somewhere else.
Oh, it's like being back on the dating scene again, mates. If you look at another person there and you go, oh, they look all right, well then you're not going to look at an ordinary looking person and you go, oh look, I'll dabble in there and I'll have a crack, and they might end up being an amazing person. You've got to have something. We're creatures of habit that and I debate this with my better half all the time because I'm not a much of a visual person, but that's me being lazy. But if something stands out visually, you're more likely to just go, yeah, I'm going to check that out. But you hit the nail on the head before, is that we've got so much media content out there, and you need something to stand out above the rest that captures your eye and go, yeah, I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as not being as bad as everything else. Like in some, that sounds probably funny, but like some industries more than other ones have, probably a higher rate of like bad looking content. It's not, it's not well realized. It's not, I won't give an example because I'm not going to like make anyone upset, but but that's the fact. And people, that's why, the biggest companies in the world invest huge amounts of money and resources and time and energy into building brands, because it's super important. And that's not only just like the brand logo, it's like everything that comes from that. It's like the culture, and it's all the language, it's what you do, it's listening, it's audio, it's visual, and like tying all that together in order to sell stories and ideas is like super important. And what do you think, Chris, about squash in the Olympics?
Oh, definitely. I think it's a no-brainer. I would love to see that. I'm a massive fan of the Olympics anyway. I just absolutely thrive off it. I think we've got some good talent coming through worldwide. It's the ultimate opportunity to get that exposure to encourage more people. We see these massive national, because Olympics is one of the biggest events in the world. It's like with the Soccer World Cup. How many people go back and play soccer? They watch it. And they'll go, oh, we're gonna go play soccer for the first time. So if you've got squash in the Olympics, you've got millions, if not billions, of eyes on the event.
Yeah,
it might be the only time people get that exposure to that particular sport. But if you get a small percentage of those people that watch that particular sport and go and join their club, you're on a winner.
The catalyst. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
it's worth the money that the government forks into putting this team together to send over there, I think.
Yeah, and then and then even just the fact that it's still not like the debate, online and offline about why it's still not in the Olympics. And they had the bid, and they had like two of the world's like all-time greats in the last bid to sort of sell the idea, to pitch it once again, unsuccessful. But you're right. I mean, it's the same, I guess. Like it gets back to what I was saying before when we were talking about Egypt, and that from what seemed to be like the initial catalyst for that happening was really a simple, it was kind of inspiration. It's like people, it doesn't always have to be an individual or individuals, but often it is. I mean, I'm no different. I'm sort of inspired by certain players that I see. I was like, that's amazing. Like I'm like unashamedly a fanboy of like certain people. It's just like, yeah, I just am. Like I just, but and that idea of being inspired is super powerful idea. It's like really, inspires young and old. I mean, to do things. And you're right. Like having something, having like a huge world stage, that would be ideal. But it certainly happened for being involved in taekwondo as a sport. also for many years now, like I saw when
Lauren Burns, I think, was it?
when we had the Sydney Games here, which was a big thing in itself, and that was the first time the sport was introduced, like as a sport in the games. Did incredible things for it here in Australia. There's just a huge surge in interest in it in general as a result of it being in the games, and like she sort of winning the gold, and the other two of the other guys winning, I think, which we were like lucky enough to train within our club at the time. These guys, and like even that, like that idea of being inspired by these things is like, you know, amazing for, you know, people who are just, you know, starting out, and to see that and feel like that's, you know, it's close to home, it's people that you can actually, you know, sort of talk to, has a big effect. Like it's hard to quantify it, but I think it has a far bigger, far-reaching effect than many people might even realise.
Yeah, well, and that's where Australia is very good at Commonwealth Games. When we had the Commonwealth Games here on the Gold Coast the other year, a few years ago, Australia cleaned up in the gold medal count. So
yeah, I remember that.
Its very best talent on the court is great enough to compete with the best countries in the world, and to do that on the big stage would be an incredible feat for Australian squash. No doubt about that at all. And there's already a lot of excitement that's heading into Birmingham in 2022, and also even heading into the World Doubles on the Gold Coast next year, because we do have such quality players up the top that we're excited to have be a part of the Australian team. And naturally, the greatest success that we hope they, you know, we want them to be very successful, but that will reflect, that will, I guess, radiate to the rest of the sporting community in Australia, where other people will go, well, I wouldn't mind getting into squash. I might want to be the next Cam Pilley or Donna Urquhart, or, you know, all these great names that are sort of floating around, and the next generation of stars that we've got coming through. They want to aspire to be like them. I think it's the best way to promote the sport on the biggest stage. And I generally believe, without no bias, that where squash in Australia is placed at the moment, it is in a very, very good point, because we're building such good relationships with our states and our key stakeholders, and we've got an outstanding team on board. Many of them, like myself, who have come from different sports, who are able to bring little bits and pieces from that to collaborate and incorporate to what the brand that we're trying to establish, to build the big motto that we're really promoting at the moment. Is we're not Squash Australia. We're really concerned about, or focused on, building squash in Australia, squash in Queensland, squash in New South Wales, etc. Those are the lines we're pumping out at the moment. And I think having the benefit of being in the Olympics and having, you know, being in the Commonwealth Games and all these things, to have that exposure, it's giving us a chance to push our message that we are focused on promoting squash in Australia. It doesn't matter whether you're 80 years old or you're 10 years old, or you're able or you're disabled. We're looking at the big picture here. Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing too that I've always observed and kind of really liked about squash, and I find that it to be it seems to be quite unique to squash in many ways, is the how sort of equitable in many ways is like squash is. Like when you go and play squash now, I mean, I understand it's a bit driven by, you know, people being put, you know, men and women and all sorts of ages being put into the mix, because there's sometimes not as many teams.
Correct.
But like the fact is, you can play against like someone who's half your age, or someone who's almost like, you know, twice your age.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're in the same grade, like you don't have that experience like almost anywhere else. And I always find it like really incredible that, you know, you can be like trounced by a person who's almost like twice your age in some instances, who are like still like a real gun, and, you know, still like playing incredible squash. and, you know, to being quite young and all sorts of different walks of life. I mean, that's not that exclusive to squash, like that part of it, but, you know, that
it's important.
element I really like I really enjoyed that about squash.
And the other thing I sort of enjoy about the sport as well is that coming from Victorian background, I know I've touched on that many times, but playing a little bit of footy back in the day, and I go out on the squash court, and I think there is so many skills that, whether it be footy or cricket or, you know, even soccer, it's all coordination. You're looking at 360-degree views. There are so many skills from some of these other sports that fit automatically right into the squash arena, which, and unlike racket sports like tennis, you've only got what's in front of you. But when you're playing squash, you've got the 360-degree view where you can play off the walls, or either on the side or behind you. So many sports require on 360-degree coordination and quick, sharp eye-hand coordination and decision-making, very quick decision-making, which that's what happens in squash, and it happens in many of these other major sports here in Australia. I think there's just so many skills, and I don't see why we can't see more people playing squash, but also playing other sports at the same time. I'd like to see, because we're so used to, you know, we should be encouraging more dual sports being played.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, just getting back also to what we were saying before about a lot of people that you meet or talk to who used to play squash, but I can like safely say I know as many, if not maybe more people that I know that occasionally play social squash with, who would fit in just fine at, you know, at a sort of a higher level playing squash. They just don't, they choose not to, because like they don't, I mean, for whatever reason. But there's like this big pool of people who used to play squash and still actually play like social squash. The guy I was saying before we went sort of on air too, I sold a couple of rackets just recently, and I was having a chat with the bloke when he grabbed the rackets, and he plays all the time. I mean, he plays like once a week with his brother, plays really regularly, but doesn't want to play, used to play comp squash. But that's just one example, but I know many people like that. So, I mean, it's, you know, there's obviously an element of what people do or why people play different sports is, you know, largely out of enjoyment. It's what like most of us do it for, is just for enjoyment. You know, you want to have fun, and then if you're playing competitions, it's more competitive, obviously, and there's other aspects to it, depending on what level you're playing it at. But I think most people, there's still that general enjoyment of it for very similar reasons. I always found in squash that you talk to, I don't know, there seems to be a certain zealousness about squash. I found, I mean, I've only had exposure to a few other sort of sports, but I've never quite found the same zealousness in the sports that I find in squash, which I always really like. You know, it says, I don't know what it exactly says. I haven't quite worked that out, but it says something about the attraction of it. I think if I was going to try to quantify it, it's sort of this mix of, for me anyway, it's like this mix of having to sort of perform in this physical way with this range of different sort of skills, but combined with this strategic element. It's because
like
it's
chess.
And because it's often described as like a sport version of chess. And so you sort of have to do that, but you got to do it in real time, you know, often like really quickly. And that's kind of as a certain sort of different excitement to that, a combination of those things.
Well, I often say to people that are asking about the game a little bit more, the part that I don't understand is I don't understand why we haven't got more younger people who have got short attention spans not playing or engaging with it. Because I think if you could sit down and watch two people who are pretty good go head to head, they might play a 25-minute match. In that 25-minute match, you have got pulsating energy, high action, intensity, adrenaline for that full 25 minutes. It's over and done with in 25 minutes. Yeah. Because of the short attention span, you're getting more action, more physical action, people jumping all over the court. It's insane to sort of think. There's a lot of young people out there, they're like, oh, we want things done. We want things done quickly and everything. We'll sit back and watch two people play squash for 25 minutes and you won't get a dull moment. It's like other sports are looking to try and condense their sports down to modified versions. But squash in its purest format, it's got it all there. So it's a package that's right there to sell to the masses, to the younger people, to go, well, if you want something short, sweet, and high energy, here it is.
That's a great perspective. I've never heard that before. But very true though. Yeah, it is. Like it's very high intensity. And I guess like what I was saying before about my initial like visual sort of re-attraction and re-exploring the world of squash online, that idea of how it had been sort of reinvented visually, same sport, like exactly the same sport, slightly different. There's been, I guess, like a bit of a drive that some different elements or styles are more attacking styles, different to some elements that were in the past, but still essentially just the same game. But then I was thinking, well, what's different is like just visually they changed a few little things. There's obviously been white balls for ages, but just the environment they've done it in, the way they've stepped things up visually, I thought, I mean, the only difference is that like and the filming quality is better, and they've got, and of course the commentators too play like a really big part. The commentators then are really funny, like they're great. And that plays like, it's a huge, it's what, like I listen to some of the stuff that you've done with Squash Australia. It's great. Like it's a really big, important part, I think, about kind of, again, the story about, sort of expression and people getting a feeling that, these are real people talking. It's not, doesn't feel scripted. It's natural. It's fun. It's all really important stuff.
Yeah. I found that out because I've got some feedback about when I started streaming for the first time, and I was learning a bit about the game. But I just have a habit of, if I see something exciting, you just become completely absorbed by what's going on, and you just get excited. And the traditional commentary, it's like
I've noticed that about you, Chris.
But you watch something, you're just like, oh, this is really exciting. I'm not looking at it as a squash fan. I'm looking at it as a sports fan. If somebody plays an awesome shot, you're living that awesome shot. So, and I think for me, what I want to sort of try and learn over the time is learn how to incorporate the basic commentary of squash, but also keep the natural element of I'm a sports fan. I'm not a cricket fan. I'm not a soccer fan. I'm a sports fan sitting back and I'm watching something exciting. So when I get excited about something, I want other people who are new to the sport, they're watching it out of interest, to be excited too, because they get that excitement out of other sports because that's the colour commentary they're sort of used to. So it's about sort of finding that balance too. But that's the part where I sort of enjoy it. If I see a great shot, I'll go off my nut because it's so exciting and you're living it, and it's something you can't fabricate at all, and you still remember those times where people have been around you and you've got something excited, you've been excited about something. And then they come back to tell you, to go, oh, you were really excited watching that back. I was like, oh, that was exciting, and they got excited too. So you often hear stories like that. But then you watch some of what PSA are doing, and then you hear someone like a Jenny Duncalf, because I've heard her do special comments a lot of times, and just the way she pronounces the actions of the game and her insight, and it's and coming from a girl, the way she sort of promotes it, it's sort of, you can't help but be drawn in to what's sort of going on. And you're not just watching the great game that's happening in front of you, but you're learning more about the game. And so it's like getting some additional coaching when you're, but you're watching a game as well. So you're taking some of those things, you go back to the court and they'll go, all right, what did Jenny say about that? Moving on to the forehand and learning about that position, that comment that she made. Those are the things that sort of stick with you.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been as just once again like a fanboy and like a person who plays squash. There's been like countless times where it's just been completely unintentional, just anecdotal things that some players have said, like, I mean, Dame's will drop and other people, and I've been like, that sounds like pretty good advice. I'm just going to give that a go and just work things into sort of a routine, and yeah, that the idea, like, you don't then start to get that benefit, I guess, as individuals, in that same sort of way, unless then, what they're doing is happening, like creating, I guess, with the bigger picture, a culture around that commentary too, which I feel that you're doing really well, and then observing in that environment in like the PSA, they do that really well too. And I think that's kind of at the heart of it. It's this, it's having this sort of banter and commentary that is really professional, well presented, like amazingly presented, really really great insights that are exciting, because when you're a fan of things, having little insights into people that you look up to, or you see, and seeing them talking about things in just a really normal sort of way is always incredibly interesting. Like it's at the heart of like what we were saying before, like why I think online media, like where that sweet spot is. It's like this meeting of the real world, getting a real sense via digital media of like the real person. It's just it's really nice.
Well, I found that even when I started streaming and I started commentating with Rod Bannister, I learnt so much about watching the game through him, because what I would do, because I'm like yourself, you do ask a lot of questions. I found in a lot of the calls that we started to do, as I was starting to get used to it, is that I would ask Rod, what advice would you give to this player while they're getting ready to set up for the next point? What advice would you give to this player if you were a coach? Because I know he's a coach. And so then he would give his insight and I would listen to him. And so in later matches where he was tied up doing other things and I was calling on my own, I would draw back from some of Rod's advice and then incorporate into that. I do some streaming for another sport, and I had an elite athlete that I was doing special comments with a few weeks ago, and I asked her questions and she gave some valuable insight, not just for the viewers, but I was learning a lot as well. So I think whether you're in the commentary booth or you're out on the court or you're watching the game, whatever role it is, you're always learning ways to improve the game and always learning to grow knowledge. But that happens because we're seeing more people putting squash online. And that's why it sort of draws back on what we were just discussing before. If we've got more people streaming more squash online, particularly here in Australia, we've got more chances to learn the game a lot more, to watch the game a lot more, and then you can take those skills when you're in your own home environment and go to the court and then go and execute them yourself.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I guess as we're getting towards the end of the podcast, I'll get you just to give everyone listening a bit of an idea of say what we've talked about all the various things that Squash Australia is doing, but can you give us one or two specific things that Squash Australia is doing right now, like in terms of either sort of programs or specific things that are happening just in sort of real time now?
So a lot of the major things we are working on is we're looking to further grow our high performance program. The mental wellness thing has certainly been a massive focus. So where the high performance team at the moment with its resources is the best it ever has been. This has been we're building a lot of great foundation blocks for any players, younger or older, that comes into this program in the future. The work that's been done in the mental health wellness space, which is probably more important now than any time in Australia in recent memory, in light of everything that's been going on. So there's a lot of work that's been done in that space, so that in the future, when the current climate does improve, that Squash Australia has more of a grasp and more working more closely with the mental wellness things and assisting younger players with their education, their job life, and getting that balance correct.
Yeah.
And then at the moment, there's a lot of collaboration with us sort of working with other states to improve areas of participation and communication, and a number of other areas as well. So we're ensuring there's more information that's available, more resources. With what we saw with the referee and coaches conferences, this is only the beginning in that platform. So we're looking at using that technology more to bring more people together from all around the country to engage and collaborate with better resources and have people from around the world with higher expertise to provide their insight, to ensure that when people go back to doing the off-court stuff or the on-court stuff, that they're getting access to more information. So these are some of the big things that we're working on, which ties into our ties in, I guess, to our unofficial mantra at the moment is we're looking at working at squash in Australia, which incorporates everything under that umbrella, not just what's happening on the court, not what's happening in our organisation, but what's happening everywhere. Yeah,
that sounds great. It sounds like that the last thing you were saying with the refereeing, and as like in everything seems to be geared from what you were saying to, making better connections, which is great, because I mean that's ultimately at its simplest level what it's all about, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because people are going through isolation at the moment in their own various ways, and it's tough.
Especially now, yeah.
So if we can provide resources out there where they can still engage and interact with the sport the best way that they can, because sport is an outlet for them to assist them with creating that sort of better well-being balance. So again, this sort of ties in again with not just with what's happening at high performance, but we're looking to try and ensure that people can get access to more resources that can help them enjoy their hobby a lot more, even if they can't get on the court, and just bring people together. And that's where a lot of our work has been sort of based on over the last sort of 4 or 5 months now during the COVID period is we've done our work to ensure that we're all working a lot closer together in this climate, and we're trying to execute that with other states and make sure that we get more resources, more assistance with them. So when we have our weekly state meetings, we've got more Squash Australia staff attending those meetings, so that we can hear more of what's going on, and if they've got any questions, they can relay that back to us, not just on a monthly basis or anything like that, but on a weekly basis. So they know that they've got more people to work with. And I'm going to be kickstarting those staff videos again next week, where we're targeting each individual staff member, where they're getting the opportunity to discuss what ideas, what projects they've got going on at this stage. We can put that in text or anything like that, but my focus is we want to put these guys as the face of that particular area. We want to showcase Stuart Boswell because he's doing a great work as a coach. We want to showcase Meredith Hodgson, who's doing a lot of work in the sporting schools program. So when people think sporting schools, they think of her. They think they can go to her for information or assistance. So we're looking at all these identities to put our faces out there more, to go, hey, this is what we're doing. We want you guys to approach us anytime. We want to help you and make your sport better and make your life better in this space.
Has Squash Australia got a podcast?
No, not yet. This is
You should have that, Chris. You should get one. We'll have the future, man.
I can't. I'm really short on words, mate. I can't really talk that much. So.
Yeah, no, you'd be terrible on a podcast. This wouldn't work out. No,
not at all, mate. Not at all.
No, quite the opposite. I'm sort of saying that seriously, because I think it's obviously there's a range of sort of ways you could probably even turn video content then also into podcast too. But that's another matter.
Definitely.
That's another matter. That's just my 20 cents or whatever it is.
I think you're doing an amazing job in the space that you're doing, mate. And that's the thing that we're really excited about at Squash Australia, is that we've got so many people like yourself who are going out there and doing tremendous work and essentially, you're volunteering your time to promoting the sport in the way that you can. And I think the more we have from that, it ties into what we're building. We build from within to promote with the rest of the country, and to promote the rest of the world. The work that yourself is doing, it's incredible, and we want to be seeing more of this. We want to see people appreciating that, because the exposure that provides for the sport is invaluable, and what it's reached to other areas of the country. It's what we want to be seeing more of.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I'm doing it, which I think most people that do things that they want to share, that they feel are important for whatever reason, they do it because they love something and they really enjoy it. It makes them feel good. They know it's good for themselves and for other people. And I mean, that's really the simple driving force for it is because I think it's important, and also because I would like to see a lot more people playing squash, because I think people would really enjoy it. I think they would, but that's from a squash lover. So, but anyway, as the last little bit, I'll just get you. Also, before we wrap up, can you just share with everyone a quote or something that you feel is sort of relevant or that you like to share with everyone?
Very simple, mate. Whatever you do, don't do it halfway.
That's pretty good. Pretty good, Chris. I like that one. Thanks so much again. It's been a real pleasure. And
the pleasure's mine, mate. And the work you're doing is terrific, and it's providing a platform for myself and others in the sport to have a voice to share with the community and really promote the sport of squash. So what you're doing is a tremendous job, mate. We do appreciate it. And
you're available like anytime you want to come on again. Absolutely.
Just give me a call, mate. I love it. Absolutely love it.
So with that in mind, that's actually it for today, guys. Thanks so much for listening into our podcast yet again. Before we go, please leave your feedback as well as any suggestions for topics you would like us to discuss in future episodes. Thanks again for listening to the Grey Business Podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode